This is the Toyota Land Cruiser Sahara ZX, a controversial new addition to the Land Cruiser lineup for the 300 series generation here in Australia. For the first time, the Toyota Land Cruiser now has a street-focused version, which you can tell because this vehicle has a front apron and a rear apron that would be totally impractical off-road and you'd want to rip off and replace with an aftermarket bar as soon as possible. It also has 20-inch alloy wheels, which are not that big for a vehicle as large as a Land Cruiser 300, but they're pretty big for a Toyota Land Cruiser full stop. The ZX is also controversial because the Land Cruiser has never been too in your face in terms of luxury chintz. Moving to this model, we've got a lot of chrome. It's really imposing, it's large and in charge, a bit like the old Infiniti QX80 in some ways though, way less ugly than that vehicle. In today's video though, I want to talk about who the ZX is for and why you might want to consider this vehicle up against something like the Land Cruiser 300 Sahara or the Nissan Patrol. It starts with the fact that the ZX is very expensive. It's the most expensive Land Cruiser 300 at just over $138,000. That's $1,000 more than the GR Sport, which is rugged focused, and about $7,000 more than the Land Cruiser 300 Sahara, which continues on as its own model, but with smaller wheels and a less outrageous red interior like the one fitted to this vehicle. However, like all 300 series models, there's just one engine available, a 3.3 litre twin turbo diesel engine, V6 with 227 kilowatts of power. A bit of a change over the old V8. But in today's video, we're going to look at the interior of the Sahara ZX and decide whether or not this is the Land Cruiser to buy. We'll check out the second row, not the third row, because there actually isn't a third row on the ZX, just two. The boot space, then we'll talk about the running costs before we head out onto the road in the Land Cruiser 300 Sahara ZX to see how this street-focused LC300 drives. Before we get started, hit subscribe. And I've also dropped a link below where you can see all the different varieties of Land Cruiser. You can build your own Land Cruiser in any spec you like, from the GX through to the ZX, and you can also download a brochure showing you all the features of this vehicle. As you'd expect, the interior of the old Land Cruiser 200 series was starting to get a little bit dated over that vehicle's very long run here on the market in Australia. But the cabin of the 300 series doesn't mix up things too much. It just introduces some more modern technology, things like Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and more safety features, which we'll get into later when we take the Land Cruiser out onto the road. But of course, there's also two new trims in the range. There's the GR Sport, which you can actually get this red interior in as well. That looks very cool with like the heritage badging on the grille. You've got cutaway bars at the front and rear. You've got triple locking differentials in that vehicle. That's the one that everybody basically wants. That on the Sahara, really. And then you have this ZX, which sits at the very top of the range, just a little bit more expensive than the GR Sport, to mark it out as the flagship Land Cruiser, at least in Toyota's estimation. But in the ZX, you get a bunch of special features. You get carbon trim here in the interior. You get things like adaptive suspension and drive modes, which we'll talk about when we get onto the road as well. But otherwise, the equipment largely carries over from the Sahara, and that means genuine leather seats with power adjustment, memory, heating and cooling, although actually only the driver has memory in this vehicle, which is slightly annoying because if you're on an around Australia drive, you're going to be swapping over, or you should be swapping over relatively frequently for safe driving. You also get heated and cooled seats in the rear, which we'll check out in a moment. And all in all, it's a cabin which is very nicely finished. Not radical in design, we still have physical buttons for things like the climate, the heated and cooled seats, quick shortcuts for the infotainment system, etc. That all works well. The seat is also very comfortable. I've done about 1,000 Ks in the Land Cruiser 300 VX, which has heated and cooled vinyl seats, but here on leather, it's even more supple and comfortable than that vehicle, and we have a good range of electric adjustment too. The steering wheel is also electrically adjustable. That's a new design, but all of the buttons on it are nice and big, so even if you had gloves on in the snow, you could still operate them. And we look forward to a mix of analog gauges and a large color trip computer with media, navigation, and trip functions all integrated in it. I like that. It's good. And I like the fact that the steering wheel is small in this car. It no longer feels like a bus from behind the wheel, which is good. Now, very, very prominent, large and wide center console, this bridge center console here. We've got wireless charging, a CD player, so you can still play your collection of music, and a 14 speaker JBL stereo in the top models of this vehicle. We've also got a double opening center box, which from the Sahara up is actually a cool box, though it isn't as large as the cool boxes you got on the old 200 series. You can't fit a bottle of wine in there, for instance, but you could get a carton of ice cream in on the way home. The glove box is fairly small, it must be said, but you can get the manuals in there, so it's not a Peugeot in that sense. The door bins are pretty big though, and all in all, it feels like quite a command center. Nice material quality, grab handles, and dark headlining on the Sahara ZX, and it would be remiss not to mention the two-tone black and red interior on the ZX, but all black is also available. As for the spec I would choose, I'd just go for a straight Sahara with its smaller wheels. You still get the nice silver mirror caps, however. A navy or grey Sahara with beige leather on that car I think would come across really elegantly. The interesting thing about the Land Cruiser is it's not as big as it seems. As I'll talk about in a second, it's actually fairly short, and it's a little short on cabin space in the second row too. You can see for myself here, sitting behind my own driving position, I do have good legroom, but it's not as capacious as it probably should be for a full-size four-wheel drive. That being said, for teenagers and adults, it will be comfortable enough back here, at least if you're in one of the outboard seats. It's worth a mention that because of the frame platform, the TNGA body-on-frame platform this vehicle uses, the floor is quite high and the seat base is a little low, so you end up kind of splaying your legs. But if you've only got 4 people in the car, that's not really an issue. We've got very much a full-featured, almost junior command center here in the back though. You've probably noticed the twin screens that you get on this vehicle, but you also get heated and cooled seats in the second row, air vents, separate fan and temperature controls for quad zone climate. You get an audio in for both sides and a volume control for these screens. You get 2 USB ports, a 12-volt socket and an HDMI in as well, so you can set up a video game console and really turn this into a pretty cool family ride. We've also got a big flip-down armrest, very substantial, 2 cup holders, and while there is a bit of a hump in the floor, it's not too bad, and it is carpeted entirely across. Material quality continues to feel very good in the Land Cruiser, befitting of this vehicle's flagship status within the Toyota brand. Everything's pretty soft and pretty nice. It's not the last word in kind of the most durable materials. For that, you'd probably buy a 76 series wagon or a Hilux or Fortuner that Toyota would be only so happy for you to order instead of one of these vehicles, because the Land Cruiser is so supply constrained. It's very, very difficult to get your hands on one at the moment, with a wait list of 12 months is what Toyota tells us. Owners and buyers in the queue are reporting a bit longer than that. It's difficult to tell the proportions of the 300 series Land Cruiser on camera. It certainly looks huge, particularly in 2 dimensions on your screen. As you can see, it's considerably taller than me. But an interesting fact about this car is that the Land Cruiser is actually a lot smaller than a Mazda CX-9, for instance, which is considerably longer. This vehicle gets in at under 5 meters in length, which means that it might fit in your garage even if you're a little bit tight on space, but not if your garage is pretty short. An interesting thing is this car is actually fitted with a Thule bicycle carrier, but I don't envy the person that has to get their bike onto the roof. You definitely need one of those little step ladders unless your height is truly superhuman. Anyway, well, I think this is quite a handsome vehicle as a whole, even in ZX spec with those big 20-inch wheels. It kind of has that Americana vibe to it, I don't mind that. The rear is probably the most difficult angle for me since it's just so bluff. But styling's subjective, you can let me know what you think down below. We have Sahara ZX badging on this very deep black car, and we also have the accessory towing kit fitted here, 3,500 kilos. Braked towing capacity is the rating for this vehicle. Seems reasonable enough with the 3.3 litre engine, 700 Newton meters of torque. Now we have a power tailgate in a single piece, which beeps the whole way up. Now we received a lot of feedback on our review of the Land Cruiser 300 GR Sport about this single piece tailgate. Previous Land Cruisers have had split tailgates, which it seems like most owners of older generations of this vehicle prefer. So I'm just noting that there has been a change to single piece. The reason that Toyota engineers have given to us is that it's better at keeping dust out of the body of the vehicle in the Outback. So you can take that as you wish. But either way, the big door, huge door, opens up to reveal a very square boot space. It is a little more practical than before. The 200 series had a 3rd row that swung up to the sides. The ZX actually doesn't have a 3rd row at all, but even on models that do, it sits in the floor now. Underneath the boot floor, we've got the toolkit because we've got an underslung spare in this vehicle. We've got plenty of tie down points. We've actually still got the cup holders for a third row that isn't there. So if you bundle someone up in the boot, they can at least store their drink, I guess. We do have a 100-watt power socket here. I think Ponch mentioned that you could run a hairdryer off it. Many people have said you, in fact, cannot. Maybe you could charge a laptop. Either way, it's a big space, but how many soccer balls can we fit in? Our test of how well a vehicle is actually packaged, because the boot liter figure is wildly variable and can be measured many different ways. Let's see if we've got a new winner of the soccer ball test. Turns out, because of the square packaging of the Land Cruiser 300's boot and the deep space beneath the window line, we actually do have a new record holder at 79 balls. So what's it going to cost you to run a Land Cruiser 300? Well, fuel consumption is definitely less in the new 3.3 V6 compared to the old 4.5 litre V8. That's one thing in its corner. In our testing across every Land Cruiser 300 we've driven, we've always been able to achieve about 10.5 litres per 100 Ks of diesel consumption, and that compares to 13 or 14 litres per 100 Ks in the old diesel V8 in the 200 series. Servicing is required for this vehicle every 6 months or 10,000 Ks, which is a little inconvenient if you do high miles or if you're going around Australia, so it's something to keep note of, although the Nissan Patrol is in exactly the same boat. However, the first 5 years and 100,000 kilometres are capped on the Land Cruiser at $3,750. In the last 12 months, the median budget direct customer has spent $1,263 to comprehensively insure a new Toyota Land Cruiser. Everybody's situation varies, and your premium will vary based on things like where you live, who drives the car, and their driving history. And lastly, the warranty on the vehicle is 5 years with unlimited kilometres. So what's the Land Cruiser 300 Sahara ZX like to drive? Well, to be honest, that's quite an interesting question because the chassis of this vehicle is quite different to the other Land Cruiser variants. The GR Sport is also different in its own way. It's a much more off-road focused version of the Land Cruiser out of the box, whereas the other vehicles are certainly off-road ready. It is a full-fat Toyota Land Cruiser after all, but the ZX is sort of set up more for on-road use. If you were going to take this far off-road, you'd need to do something about the aesthetic treatment of the front and rear bar because they're just hanging down so low, a bit like a Lexus LX. And that's why we focused today's video of the ZX on the terrain that this car is clearly designed to spend most of its time on, which is tarmac. Before I come to the unique ride and handling characteristics of the ZX, let's talk about the powertrain because that's common to all 300 series vehicles. And if you're watching this video, you probably already know the stats, so I'll keep it pretty quick. We've got a 3.3 litre twin-turbo V6 diesel under the bonnet. Toyota says it's a new engine. It's an interesting one because if you divide the cc's of the previous V8 into 8 and then multiply that by 6, you actually end up with the precise cc's of the new V6 engine. Could be a coincidence, just worth pointing out. 3.3 litres of capacity, as I mentioned, but we're making good power and torque. 227 kilowatts of power and 700 newton meters of torque. It's still reasonably low stress, I suspect, but it's certainly not as low stress as the 200 series 4.5 litre twin turbo V8 was, that produced a pretty low 200 kilowatts of power and 650 newton meters of torque, and many owners modified their vehicle in order to produce closer to that engine's prodigious potential, but out of the factory they were deeply understressed. That is still kind of the vibe you get from the new engine. It certainly doesn't feel or sound highly strung, but no doubt it is making more power and more torque from smaller displacement. That's just a fact. And of course, it's far too soon to talk about the longevity, but I doubt that Toyota would throw away its reputation for durability with the Land Cruiser so wantonly, just like that. So I suspect we're going to find that over time this engine is up to the job, but I don't have a crystal ball, so it's hard to say for sure. What I can tell you though is that this engine feels more drivable than the previous V8. The V8 often felt breathless, loud fans going, but not making a huge amount of progress. Whereas the torquey 3.3 litre twin-turbo V6 just feels effortless. This is still a really large and heavy vehicle, There hasn't been much weight saving going on in the transition from 200 to 300, but the V6 feels more than up to the job of motivating this full drive. And in fact, off the line, it proceeds very, very smartly. And part of that is down to the new 10-speed torque converter automatic transmission that really suits the car and keeps the V6 diesel right in its torque band and on the boil all the time. It's a really good partnership. Also bundling in the full-time four-wheel drive system. You can move between high 4 and low 4, but there's no two-wheel drive or rear-wheel drive mode in this vehicle, just like the last one. Where the Sahara ZX starts to depart from the VX and the Sahara, which are also popular premium grades of the Land Cruiser, is that it has Toyota's adaptive variable suspension system, which gives it basically the ability to stiffen or soften the ride based on your inputs. Even in the sportiest Sport Plus setting, there's still quite a lot of body motion and body roll in the chassis of the 300 series, as you'd expect for a body-on-frame vehicle. And in fact, I find myself not using that setting because it actually introduces an unwanted jitter and nervousness into the ride on a smooth road. So instead, I find just using the sport setting feels about right. That adds a little bit of weight to the steering, but not an unwanted amount. You just have to respect the limits of the 300 series, which as a driver's car is certainly modest, and yet the dynamics are a clear improvement over the 200 series. And much of that comes down to the additional rigidity in the upgraded chassis. The TNGA-F platform, as it's called on this vehicle, it's not all new. It is an adaptation of the previous car, though almost everything has been fettled or changed in some way. And the car does come away more rigid on paper, and that's very much how it feels from behind the wheel. It's not as floppy as before. It tracks a true line in the corners, and it's not as disturbed by bumps. All in all, it's a more pleasurable driving experience and a better car for the kind of twisting country roads that you find in parts of Australia, like where I am now. Overall, the ride is comfortable, the seats are comfortable, the driving position is good, but that comfortable ride is amplified even further on smaller wheels because the ZX has 20-inch wheels, still fairly tall, high-profile tyres. 20s these days are not even that big. We test cars with 23-inch wheels here and there, but the 18s of a Sahara or a VX would be even more comfortable. Of course, all Land Cruisers have some level of off-road chops, and you have selectable off-roading modes, crawl control, low range. It's all there for the ZX, it's just that cosmetically the vehicle isn't as well set up for moderate to difficult off-roading work, but almost like any vehicle with an all-wheel drive system, a simple gravel road is very, very easy to dispatch in this car. Lastly, the safety systems. It's been an area of a big upgrade for the Land Cruiser. We've got lane keep assist, but it more bounces between the sides of the lane rather than tracking to the center, so it's not Toyota's best and finest effort there, but it's workable. The vehicle does have adaptive cruise control, though it is allowed to fall over speed when going down hills, and given it has access to the brakes, that's a little perplexing. We're going to start pointing that out more often in our reviews when that's the case. We do have blind spot monitoring, rear cross traffic alert, and we even have things like junction AEB that can detect pedestrians. So the 300 series Land Cruiser will actually be able to apply the autonomous emergency braking turning into a road if a pedestrian is detected walking in front of the car, which is certainly a nice peace of mind. So those are my impressions of the 2022 Toyota Land Cruiser Sahara ZX. My subjective opinion is that if I was after a 300 series Land Cruiser that did the street-focused luxury plushness thing really well, I'd probably go for a new Lexus LX because that vehicle also benefits from Lexus's primo material quality. I totally get wanting an upmarket Land Cruiser, it's just that I think the $131,000 Sahara does it best. And clearly buyers agree with me because on the second-hand market, the markups on Sahara 300 series units are much higher than the markups on the ZX. In fact, the ZX has the lowest markups of any Land Cruiser 300 series, which is kind of interesting. We have a video about that. I'll put the link below in the description. Anyway, keen to know your view on the ZX. Is this a spec that you'd like to buy? That's totally cool. All these things are really subjective. My opinion on it doesn't have to be shared by you. Leave me a comment. While you're there, hit subscribe and the notification bell. And don't forget about those links to build your own Land Cruiser in any spec, download a brochure or organise a test drive so you too can get on this vehicle's super long wait list.